Okay, I'd now like to introduce today's session titled Data Literacy for the Non-Analyst Part 2 with Kari Peterson, an institutional research analyst in the Office of Planning and Analysis and the chair of the Cal Data Visualization Network. Kari presented Part 1 last fall, along with a wonderful panel that spoke about how to become a data analyst. The panel was so intriguing that it filled up most of the session, leaving Kari without enough time to talk fully about data literacy. So she's graciously offered to return to Cannes to pick up where she left off. So I'm going to put a link to her slides in the chat. And in the meantime, welcome Kari with your applause icons as she talks to us about how to become data literate. Take it away.
Thank you, Katie. Thanks for having me here. Good morning, everybody. Yeah, so as Katie mentioned, the last time I presented this in September, I was lucky enough to have a whole panel full of folks from across campus come and do sort of like a little bit of a forum, and the questions were so robust from the group that we ended up taking up most of the time, which was amazing and awesome, and that was really great. But so yeah, basically, I feel like we should probably start from the beginning of the deck, because if I personally couldn't remember what I covered in September, I'm sure no one else could remember it. So I'll just start from the top again. This presentation is a little bit different maybe from typical Cannes sessions, because it's not a review of a project. It's just sort of like a general introduction and approach. And this is something that I think is a hallmark of the Cal Data Visualization Network, how we do presentations is sort of just more conceptual. Yeah, and so the Cal Data Visualization Network, which I'm the chair of, is a community of practice on campus, and everyone is welcome to attend. The slide deck that Katie linked to has a bunch of resources and interactive links throughout the deck, and the links to access the Data Visualization Network are also there. Let me share my screen. So it's the second to last slide has some links in it to the Visualization Network, along with the third to last slide has a bunch of resources and links. So keep this deck handy is the point, I guess, because it has all kinds of good stuff in it. Also, Katie, I shared with Katie the link to the shared folder from last time. I've compiled a bunch of resources information in this shared folder along with the deck. And in it is a link to the video recording from the last time. And I'll put a link to this recording in here as well when it's up. And real quick, I'll touch on, I set aside a whole bunch of data literacy self-assessments in a subfolder here. And we're going to go through one of them together, but there's several, and they take different approaches. And so I encourage you to check those out if you have time. All right. So what we're going to cover today in the agenda, and I wanted to also mention that the sort of idea of the user or the persona for this presentation, it's not just one single group, right? So it was intended originally to be geared towards folks who maybe were just beginning in a career as an analyst, or were interested in sort of transitioning into that role. But I also found that a lot of this is really helpful for folks who are currently analysts, and even folks who just work alongside of and manage analysts, because all of these ideas and concepts are stuff that we use every day, and most of us already know a lot of it, and we just don't even realize that we know it. So yeah, so multiple audiences, and I'll try not to go too deep on any specific thing, but give enough of a broad outline that you can do your own follow-up research if you're interested. So we're going to cover what the definition of data literacy is, and then we're going to cover sort of a collection of a cluster of skills that you need to sort of understand and get a start with furthering your literacy and upskilling, if that's interesting to you. So I wanted to say one of the resources in the folder is a comprehensive overview and the results of a survey that one of the software out there that does visualization, they did a global survey of staff, and they found that 36% of the employees that they reviewed or surveyed reported procrastinating at least 1 hour over tasks that involve data. They found that 14% of employees globally report feeling overwhelmed when working with data at least once a day, and nearly half of all surveyed feel overwhelmed once a week. And so it was really interesting, and it goes into more detail about folks will procrastinate and then find alternative ways around it if they don't really know what they're being asked to do, what the scope of their project is, and or what their tools are, which is interesting and totally fair, right? That's one of the things that is true of us in this moment in time. We have a lot of exposure to tools and data sets. We just don't always have the sort of maybe formal training that we need. And so what that leaves us with is, I think, a lot of people feeling underqualified for working with data, and that's really not true. People just need to understand that they do have these skills and they do know what they're looking at. And so sketching out the sort of shape of it will be helpful for that. So in addition to things like maybe knowing hard skills like SQL, there's a cluster of other skills that are really important to understanding data and being able to use it fluently. And these aren't all just, hard skills. So there's things like just natural curiosity, wanting to find the answer to something, trying to figure out the most efficient or best way to solve a problem, domain contextualization, which means you might have a number, but in context if that number is important or not. And that comes really just from exposure and experience with the domain, not necessarily just the data itself. And then the last two, which are really popular right now, is visualization and storytelling. And those two things go together. And we'll touch on those in a little bit more detail in a minute. So when did you first learn to read a chart? A lot of us might not even remember that far back. It might have been something in passing, maybe like a 2-week module in a math class. But there's actually an entire skill set involved in this and decoding what you're looking at that you're bringing to bear on this. So what we're looking at right here is actually the same set of information, just presented with a different scale. And so this touches briefly on the idea of ethics and good data practices, along with just being sort of literate and savvy when you're looking at something. The scale on the right, which goes up by a half each tick, condenses and smushes down the difference, so it smooths it out. And then on the left, it's broken out far more granularly, and it looks like there's some really, really staggering changes happening. And so this also bears on the idea of domain contextualization. What are you looking at, and is this meaningfully representing what you're trying to convey and communicate with a visualization? So that's kind of like data literacy in a nutshell. Let's see. Okay. So if you are interested, feel free to put in a guess in here in chat. The question is, what percentage of US workers report themselves to be data literate? So this is self-reported, the idea of how many folks out there consider themselves data literate sufficient to be able to do their work. We got some ideas coming in. Great. So it looks like we got a range from 12.13 and so on % all the way up to 40, 45. And again, this number comes from the same
Hey, Mom.
survey. And the answer is 28% of Americans feel like they are data literate, which is interesting because it's fairly ahead of some other countries that I would have assumed felt more confident in their literacy, just because as a result of kind of knowing liminally what is required in American education. A lot of the roots of data literacy grow out of things like math class, right? And we don't necessarily have as much of a rigorous approach as other countries, but we have 28% of our workforce feels data literate, which is behind India, but ahead of Japan. So I thought that was fascinating. But still, that's not 100%, right? That's not even half. So that's a huge opportunity right there. Okay, so I touched briefly on the idea of having a ton of access to tools and data sets and not really knowing how to use them or not having been formally trained to use them. And this again is unique because we are all adult learners, right? Like none of this stuff existed, or maybe nowadays some of this stuff existed when you were in school. The passage of time is brutal, but basically a lot of us just get exposed to these kind of tools on the job, and we might have like a quick 2-hour workshop and then we're set loose, and so it can be intimidating and anxiety producing if you don't feel like you know what you're doing with the tool set. Yeah, so of the 68% of respondents that had some access to business intelligence software in the survey, again, referencing the survey, I'll move on from that in a minute, I promise. Of the 66%, only 20% said they felt comfortable using it. So again, huge gap and room for opportunity. So this is from another survey, actually, some research. They found that 1 in 5 people on the planet have Excel on their computer. So that's the ubiquity of that tool. That comes actually from a research project from Microsoft, who makes Excel. So even though there are a lot of tools out there and they're proliferating every day, and a lot of them are sort of domain specific, there are a couple of universals out there that might be the right place to start. And one of them is obviously Excel. It's market dominant. It's already there. It's free to you, relatively as an employee, and it can do a lot of the data literate tasks that you need. So I'm going to touch briefly on this. So there's a gentleman named Edward Tufte, who is very well known in data visualization circles, and he's written a large number of books. And he wrote a pamphlet, which I've actually included in the Drive folder for this presentation, called Visual and Statistical Thinking, Displays of Evidence for Making Decisions. And there are 2 case studies in it. One is on John Snow, who actually knows something. A gentleman named John Snow who took a handle off of communal water pump in London and proved with visualizations that you can curb cholera. There's a cholera outbreak by removing this pump handle and basically just determining empirically that it was cholera spread by bad water, right? So all of those things were in question at the time, and it's like this groundbreaking example of using visualization to solve a problem. The second case study in the pamphlet is this one. So this is in 1986. There was a really sad accident. The spaceship Challenger blew up right after liftoff, and there were some teachers on board. There was going to be a sort of amazing thing, and it was horrible. And so there was a really, really huge inquest into it, and a lot of discovery work was done, and he covers it in a lot of detail. Basically, on the right-hand side of this slide is one of the visualizations that the folks at NASA used to map out their. So let me pause and say, the thing that was determined to be the cause of the accident was called an O-ring. So an O-ring is basically like something flexible, like plastic, that seals between 2 hard things. So like For example, the seal on your water bottle is an O-ring. And they determined O-rings were the problem, and they went to look to see what evidence they had prior that O-rings, were going to be failing in some kind of patterned way. And so on the right-hand side is their visualization, which at a glance is not necessarily very helpful in understanding what you're looking at. And on the left is one of the several visualizations Tufte made of the same data sets, illustrating how having just simple, better tools around visualization would have helped provide better answers. And I won't go into too much detail on this, but the differences are stark. And I will caveat all of this by saying some folks, it's contested. The findings and results that Tufte came up with have been vigorously debated in the public sphere. So don't take it with a grain of salt, but it's a very interesting read. Okay, so saying all that, right? Saying that we all have access, imperfect and not always complete access to data sets and tools. And we know there's a bunch of ideas out there and concepts that we need to stick together to create a large picture of data literacy. How do you start? How do you know what you know or don't know? And as I showed before in the Drive folder, there's a set of self-assessments I put together. This field is burgeoning, and so there are a lot of companies out there who have free data literacy assessments, provided that you give them your email address, which I don't think is cool. I mean, it's still free, right? But I don't really want to buy your product. So I went ahead, and the ones that I could scrape and put down for us to access, I went ahead and put in that folder. But this title is a link to that set, and there's a lot more out there that you can, if you're willing to give your email out, take a company's particular test out there. And the image here is actually really interesting. It's from the visual data literacy assessment that comes from the Open Data Initiative. And they're pretty cool. Long story short, they make a lot of really interesting, helpful tools for organizations to sort of grapple with the scope of what their needs are around data. And so this was the only literacy assessment tool I saw that was visual. And so worth a look. It's a giant poster size image, and it's in that folder. So once you do your assessment and you determine sort of based on what your findings are, that you need to grow your skills in a certain area. The next thing is to sort of prioritize them, right? Because again, most of us here in this audience, we are, adult learners. We've worked full time. We have a lot of other commitments, and so you can't just drop everything, and learn SQL. You'd love to, but it's not always practical. So this is one of the interesting tools I came across for sort of prioritizing what to learn as a self-learner. And so of the set of the group of things around data literacy that you might need to learn, so things like the technical skills, programming, for example, the critical thinking skills, which also there's a whole set of resources in here for that, which I thought was interesting. As an adult learner, not in a philosophy class, how do you learn critical thinking or like brush up on those skills? And one of the ways out there is put out by the Harvard Graduate School of Education, and it's called Visible Thinking, and I'll show you that in a second. Then there's also all the software out there, and then there's like the general conceptual ideas around GRAPHICACY, which is being able to read and write with graphs. Anyway, so this square here, this magic square, was put together by the Harvard Business Review, and you take whatever concept you're interested in, and you try and figure out approximately how much time it would take you to learn it, and then how useful it would be for you. And only you can decide that, right? What is important to you in your job? There's a lot of self-education opportunities out there as well. There's links in the slide deck, and there's a lot of communities of practice on campus that are kind of a hybrid, right? They're sort of low barrier to entry, low effort. You're not necessarily like signing up for like a Coursera course where time is running out, but you have a group of people who are like-minded and interested in learning the same thing you are. I have personally found that to be a really good fit for me in my learning, is to have the encouragement of others, but kind of like doing it on my own time. So the Harvard Business Review took their magic square and they mapped onto it. Basically, they analyzed dozens of articles written by Excel experts and figured out where on the map the 100 most useful features are. And so this is the result. So this is just pieces and parts of it, the Excel software. So the things in the bottom right here, the learn it right away square is interesting. So Control Y for redo. I always knew about F4. I didn't know Control Y was Excel. I thought that was just Google Sheets, so that was interesting. F2, which is step into a cell. If is error is a great one, just from like a static point of view. It's like a wrapper for other formulas, and I finally took the time to figure out the syntax of that, and it's very nice because what it does is, if you ever have like Excel YALACHI, like with like a # NA or like a div /O like error message, it can feel like annoying and like anxiety producing for me anyway. So if you wrap your formula in this, you can tell it to give you something specific as a result if there's an error. So you can like say, you know, a sentence like puppies and rainbows are great, or I usually do something like a no, so blank spaces or a 0. It's very helpful. And then above that, things that you may want to do sort of with a group collectively or somewhat more formally are the ideas around pivot tables and conditional formatting, among other things. So this is a very interesting study. Okay, so of all of these clusters of ideas, right, there's only so much I can really cover in an hour and a half overview. But the thing that definitely I feel like I can kickstart you with and give you resources for are the things around graphicacy. They're maybe the cluster of concepts that is maybe easiest to learn or fastest to learn. There's a lot of resources out there to do, and it cuts across domains and tools. So it's a really good place to start, I guess. Right, so we're going to cover these. The first one is marks, and I use that as like the umbrella term for everything that you see in visualization. Any of like the dots, the lines, the you know, any pattern you see, that's a mark. And the place where it is, the position, the color, the shape, the size, all are separately encoded meaningfully. And so that term is marks. The second is metaphor. And that's basically just kind of really pointing out the connection between our language that we speak every day and how we read and write charts and graphs. Data types, which again, along with metaphor, helps to dial in. We're getting closer and closer here to understanding and giving us the tools to make really effective charts and graphs. All software out there has data types to encode and store their information, right? And they're not always exactly the same. So some pieces of software will have a slightly different term for the concept, and we'll review that as well. But there are out there, and each one of them is traditionally linked to like the best practice type of mark, which helps hack chart choice. So I think that's the thing that gives most people the most anxiety, is knowing the most effective way to encode their data. And then lastly, data ink ratio, which is the idea, again, by Tufte, the guy with the NASA charts, that for effective communication, you want to basically not indulge in all of the bells and whistles that might be available to you in a given piece of software, but really make sure you're stripping it down to just the most vital pieces of information. So I'll just quickly cover these guys here. So starting off with spatial metaphor. So basically, all language encodes abstract ideas with concrete descriptors. And so what I mean by that is Cal has the motto Fiat Lux, which means let there be light. And we don't even know that we know that when they say let there be light, they don't mean like get a flashlight. They mean like let there be enlightenment, let there be understanding, right? Knowledge. And that's a metaphor. So that is mapping the concrete experience we have of light actually showing us things, right? Like when darkness is lifted, we can see, and it's a physical thing in the world. And we map that onto going from a state of not knowing to knowing. And all of almost everything, once you start going deep on metaphor, you start to feel like a college undergrad in your dorm room, like, whoa. You can just keep going on it. It's a profound domain to research. But the point here is that we're mapping that, we're applying those metaphors, and we don't even really realize it, to how we make our charts and graphs. So like on the left here, the comparing amounts as a change in size, we're visually representing an idea, and the fact that we have decided that one bar being taller than the other bar means a change in amount. That's encoding a metaphor there, because in our real experience, something that has more in it is going to be bigger. So a bag of $100 is going to be one size, and a bag of $1,000 is going to be much larger. So a concrete example there is mapping that experience onto symbols on a page. And then on the right hand side, the line chart showing change in quantity over time. Why is that different? So there's a couple of different. Actually, I won't go into that. I'll get sidetracked. But in the Western world, most languages read left to right, and so we have created this idea that time moves left to right. And so the change in status of something, right, from one point in time to another, is connected. So something in the past existed some way, and now it's different. So we started off at 1, and now our thing is 2, and that it's important to indicate that that's related to time and change, is why we're going to choose line charts there. But the secret is that all data visualization is just related to this idea of how we're mapping concrete onto abstract ideas. So getting into the idea of marks. Apologies, I have two screens, but I've stacked them vertically. So trying to find my little mouse takes me a minute, apologies. Right, so we talked a little bit about this before. So the kinds of marks you can use in a visualization are position, where things are relative to other things, length, as we looked at with our bars, size, how big something is relative to something else, color intensity, which is saturation, and then color hue, which is just separate colors. And then lastly, the shape. So coding with color, there we go. So actually, this is one of the things that I think is trips folks up the most, and it's one of maybe the easiest things to get a handle on, and really helps upskill your effectiveness with data visualization. Is that actually color and its use and the patterns you're using makes a difference, right? You're encoding some information, even just with like the set of colors you decide to use. And so what I mean here is at the top you see qualitative, and you see how each color is separate and they're not related to each other. They're just complete separate colors. And there's no inherent idea of hierarchy there. Purple's not better than yellow. They're just different. So that's the kind of data set that you would encode with this color set is called qualitative or categorical, and we'll touch on those data types in a minute. But that basically means like number of dogs versus number of elephants. Let's say you're like examining a data set of animals in the world. Purple for dogs and yellow for elephants. There's no inherent relationship there. It's just, you know, to distinguish them from each other, their separateness. In the middle, we have sequential, which goes from paler to darker. And again, left to right here. Usually when we see something with a scale like this, maybe like a map, with some countries that are light and some that are darker, we just know without realizing maybe that the lighter ones have less, in quotes, whatever we're measuring, they have less of it. And the darker countries will have more of something. And that again maps to that idea of concentration, right? The more color we have, if we have actual paint, the darker the color will be. And so using this effectively is very important. And getting these two confused is very common. And I've even seen people flip the sequential one around and have the more category, in quotes, be the paler one, which basically has people reading things backwards. Because again, there's artistic license and there's things that are interesting, but there are basically the context that your end user, your audience is bringing to bear on this is informed largely by metaphors, by their daily experience and what they've seen before. And so constraining yourself to using, you know, your sequential colors in the right order is beneficial for effective communication. And then lastly, below it, diverging, same idea as sequential, but going in two different directions. So from left to right, from the middle to the right is more of one thing, and from the middle to the left is more of something else. And the middle is like 0 or whatever, mean, average. And this can be useful for, well, for example, means and averages. If you're diverging from an average in one direction or the other, it's important to note that you're diverging and also that you're diverging less or more than something else. So that's what that color set is for. And I will pause and say, it's really interesting to go deep on this stuff. If you don't remember from school your color wheel, how colors relate to each other and how they complement, right, each other. So the diverging scales are actually in the middle, a combination of the two outer colors, and the gradients in between are stages of that combination. So knowing that will also help you in choosing a diverging scale. So speaking of scale, back when we were looking at the second or third slide, with the green bars that were stacked on the left dramatically and on the right sort of flat, paying attention to scale is really important. And this is largely going to be something that's going to be context dependent, right? And stuff that you know, because you know your data set, you know your domain. But also there's sort of like a general set of ethics and approach around using scale, because you can minimize something that should be really paid attention to, or you can, you know, expose something that's huge and gigantic and important to someone who, and it's not, right? So what I mean by that is, like, you create a chart with like the dramatic scale difference and you give it to your boss and they're like, oh my gosh, we have to act on this right away. Like, this is huge, we need to correct this. And then it turns out actually the difference not as staggering as we thought. So that idea of being mindful when you use scale and knowing the appropriateness for what you're looking at. Okay, how are we doing? Quick poll. Does anyone want to take like a 5-minute break, or are we good to keep going? Put it in chat, please. Just put like a 5 or keep going. Keep going. Okay, cool, great. Nice. I'm always worried that I'm sort of swamping folks with stuff. So all of that relates back to our data types. So I don't know if you ever maybe experienced this. You put a formula in Excel and then you hit enter and all you see is the formula. You don't see the result that you're looking for. And you maybe took, half an hour to Google why that was happening. And you discovered that your cell was set to a data type for characters or string. Text, that actually is what Excel calls it. So if your cell is formatted and coded to understand what you put into it as text, it's just going to keep the text there. It's not going to give you it's not going to evaluate your formula. And so that idea illustrates knowing what data type you're using, and then also the general concept and knowing that there's a set of them and they each map to sort of some best practices around visualization and even aggregation. And sort of mastering that kind of gives you the outside scope of being able to make and consume charts and graphs effectively. So for example, SQL will encode data in a certain way. They might use the word float, but Tableau might use the word decimal, right, for the same idea. And so knowing that there's also sort of like this messy Venn diagram of data types per tool, and suspecting that if you're having a problem, it might be because the data type is encoded incorrectly, is very helpful. So going back to that idea of the colors, right, and the discrete colors, the qualitative being, or categorical, being like dogs and elephants, purple and yellow, that would be something that is a discrete entity. And that's going to be visualized in a way that's different from what's known as continuous. And so something that's continuous, like money, right, will have infinite numbers of points in between two nodes. And you can string them together, and you don't want to have that visualized with like separate chunks. Also, continuous is going to be the way to go if you're doing something sequential. Yeah, and so integer and float are both numbers. They can have traditional math done to them. And string is characters, so text. And string also overrides everything else. So if you have a number with like one letter in it, then the whole field becomes string. And then Boolean is just yes or no, true or false. And there's others out there, right? There's ordinal, and you can get into really complex stuff, but these are like the basics, and just getting a general idea of whatever tool you're using, how they describe data types is going to get you really, really far down the road in figuring out the best ways to visualize your data. Okay. So bringing all of that together with the idea of also position and size, this is a graph, a chart, a table of the different kinds of marks you can make in a visualization. So, according to this, there's about 9 general buckets of ideas for how you can visualize something. And what's interesting is that the arrangement of these figures is actually a scale from more accurate to less accurate. So there's been a bunch of studies out there around human perception and how we consume information and what we're doing when we put it together. So back again to that idea of what metaphors we are reading into the encoding, what patterns we're going to be seeing, what draws our eyes first. They've done a bunch of research, and they found out that the space where the data is set, the position, is the most effective and the quickest way to represent information if you can do it that way, right? Your data set may not always lend itself to that idea of position. But what's really interesting is that different colors and saturation is at the very bottom. And I feel like that's the one that we all are, we gravitate towards, right? It's like the most interesting and fun one to work with, but it's the least useful. And who knows, maybe if they do the study later and we all learn that we're encoding discrete variables and categorical variables with color, maybe we'll all become more effective at it. And I did want to say briefly again, remind everyone that the slide deck Katie linked to has a bunch of links in it. If you're new on the call, there's a bunch of interactive links and things in the deck. So I encourage you to follow along or to do it on your own, or just bookmark it, add it to your drive as like a resource for later. And the drive folder we also shared the link to has a bunch of other resources, like curated set of resources that I think would be useful to folks learning data literacy here and now. And all right, so we have a general idea and understanding of the fact that marks are meaningfully encoded in certain ways because of specific things like metaphor and the data type. And then, but how do you move toward choosing the right chart, right? How do you really do that? So this is a really cool little chart table again, how to sort of translate your question into your possible visual choice. And this is put together by Nathan Yao, who is amazing and great, and he has the credit in the slide, and there's a link to him. I encourage you to check him out. He has a lot of books. And so the idea is that when you're making the visual, you're answering a question, right? The question might be posed by you in your exploration of a data set, or it might be coming from the outside. People want to know, how has X changed over time? And so as you do that research, you can figure out that that will be something visually indicative of a line chart. So this is very helpful. Bringing all of that together, nevertheless, you guys all know that there are 10 bazillion chart types out there, and some of them are domain specific or edge cases for usefulness, and your data set might be the exception to the rule. And so this started off as a chart put together by the Financial Times, and it was actually replicated by somebody on Tableau, which is very helpful. And again, this is a link. It'll take you to the image, which is a gigantic poster that you can download and keep. I tried to print it out once, and it's just, to be able to read the words, you have to print it like as a banner. It's huge, but it's super helpful. So this one kind of approaches the idea of chart choosing from a different angle. It starts with the general idea of like, what concept are you trying to encode? So it's like a step past what question are you asking. Going back to this slide. So if this is where we're starting, this column of questions, this chart starts here in the middle for the concepts. And so it might just be helpful to sort of look at it visually and browse, go shopping. So for example, I'll just randomly choose magnitude. So size comparison, there's a whole blurb about best practices and when to use it, and what kinds of things you're encoding with it, and then the types that are available to you. And you can keep going deeper and deeper on like, what's more appropriate for your data set than the rest. But there's all the different kinds of charts you can use just for that idea, or representing that idea. Yeah, so this is very cool and helpful. Okay, so having done a whirlwind tour of sort of the basic concepts that we know we need to know, right? irrespective of tools out there or types of data, just like the general quick things that we know we need to know and use, right, to be able to read and write data. Let's see how we're doing. So this assessment link here, I highly recommend doing this with me, along with me. It's short, easy, you don't need to give them an email, and it gives you, at the end, a whole bunch of resources for getting started. So I'm going to click on that link. So hopefully it takes you to the Data Literacy Project website. And this is the source of the research paper I was referencing in the very beginning. They put it together, and I will say, caveat is that it's an org, but it is partially funded by Click, which is a tool, a software tool for visualization. So, you know, they have skin in the game, so take it with a grain of salt. But they are very interested in furthering the concepts of data literacy. So I'm going to go ahead and start the test. Question 1. How would you feel if you were confronted by this scenario? 3 charts with no labels. So my choices are, it looks like it's boring graphs on a screen. I'm completely at ease. I build these all the time. I'm interested, but I don't know where to start. And I'm torn between excitement and dread, which is honest and fair. So I'm going to choose C for this one. I'm intrigued, but I don't know where to start. And then so when you select it, it gives you the pop-up for the next arrow. Question 2. Which of the following best describes your experience with data? Data isn't mission critical to my job, so I don't rely on it. I use data occasionally when it's presented to me. I'm skilled with data and I'm often asked to share insights. And D, I have access to all the data I can wish for. So that's interesting, right? Because those are not necessarily like on a spectrum or a scale here. These are kind of different answers. So I'm going to say, I'm going to choose B. I use data occasionally when it's presented to me. Question 3. How often do you feel overwhelmed with data? A, quite often with all of the requests that come in. B, I don't really let it bother me. It's just numbers and stats. C, monthly when the bills come in. And D, never. It's useful. Why would it be overwhelming? I'm going to choose A, quite often. Question 4. Do you agree that understanding data is as vital as reading and writing? Completely agree. It's crucial. It'll never be as vital as reading and writing. It gives you an edge, but in the future will be vital. And D, it's not widely used now, but it's very important. So I'm going to say A, completely critical. 5, how important is the ability to tell stories with data? It's a vital skill, helping makes it easier to share results. B, why would we need to share? Why would we need stories? Data is data. C, I think it can be helpful, but I don't know how to. And D, storytelling, they do that with data. I'm going to choose C. 6, central tendency is utilized to measure a central or typical value in a data set. Do you feel comfortable utilizing it? My choices are, what is central tendency? I utilize central tendency on a daily basis. I feel I know the term, but I'm not sure how to use it. And D, I don't want technicalities. I just want to show the final result. I'll choose C. I know the term, but not sure how to use it. Okay, we're closing in on the end here. Outliers can be used to analyze data differently. How often do you use them? Outliers don't provide any help in analysis. B, what is an outlier again? I feel it may be beneficial. C, I have tried using outliers, but needs some more work with outliers. And D, outliers have been a great source of insight, allowing me to dig deeper. I'll choose C, need some more work. 8, how often correlation mean causation with data? And this is an assumption that should never be made. B, I think quite often, but I need to learn more. C, I sometimes think that, but need to learn how to test it more accurately. And D, why are we looking at correlation versus past experience? So I'll choose C. And question 9, what are your feelings on data visualization? A, I would rather dive into coding. B, I build them, but I'm not as good as I want to be. C, I don't know what you're talking about. Or D, I'd really like to advance my skills. I'll choose B, build them, but I'm not as good as I want to be. Last question, 10. Do you agree that predictive analytics allows us to see into the future by finding patterns and trends? A, I feel gut feeling is a much better predictor. B, I feel prediction and probability can help, but it baffles me. C, predictive analytics are vital to the success of corporations. And D, I want to develop my skills in predictive analytics. So I'm going to choose D, develop my skills. And now I'm going to see my results. So there are 4 pathways for groups that they give you the results for. Data aristocrats, data knights, data dreamers, and data doubters. And so we got data dreamer. You recognize the importance of working with data and the benefits it can have on your role. You take the data you are given at face value, which is a concern when you don't receive enough support to interrogate it. If anyone took this along with me and you want to feel brave and put your results in chat, which one you got, that'd be great to learn, great to hear. I'm going to download my learning pathway. Data Knight, Dreamer, nice. Knight, we got a lot of experts here. Dreamer, nice. So I clicked on this download your learning pathway and it gave me a PDF. Okay. Here is the challenge with having 2 screens. Let me move this over. Okay. So the learning pathway I got as a data dreamer shows me my target skill set, what I want to develop, the outcomes I want from learning it, and then the actual resources for doing that learning, which is very, very cool. And a lot of this comes from that website. And then they actually referenced a lot of stuff that they didn't make themselves, which is cool. Some podcasts, some books, very, very helpful. And so the skill set here, right? Data literacy, mindset, leadership, communication. So they may not all be directly relevant, right, to what you're doing, but this is sort of like the comprehensive sweep for data literacy and the domains that you might want to further develop. And some might be more relevant to your current job. Some might be relevant to what you want to do in the future. So I found this to be very helpful. Oh, I realized I did not change and click over. So back when I was, let's go back to this. So what do you want to learn first? So this idea around critical thinking and visible thinking, I felt like was the hardest to tackle, both as a free thing, right? And as something that is a low barrier to entry. And so Project Zero is the thing that Harvard Grad School put together. And it's a toolbox for working through and figuring out how to approach something. And long story short, I put a bunch of these into the shared drive folder. So you don't have to like research these on your own if you don't want to. But so some of the outcomes, let's see. Yeah. So they look like this. So it's like a one-sheeter that asks questions and prompts prompt you to think about something in a specific way. So that's what that is. I thought that was very cool. Because that's not really necessarily a data or a domain that we have easy access to, right? As self-learners, finding where to start with that is can be hard. Okay, so hopefully we have our target skill set here. And I will, one more quick thing is show you the self-assessments now that are available in the folder. So the Open Data Institute, this is the one that is the giant infographic, which is very, very cool and helps you understand sort of the constellation of ideas and what you might need specifically for your job. It's geared towards organizations, again, like I said, but it can be useful for individuals as well. And then the Maricopa County Sheriff's Department, so Superintendent's Department, put together a data literacy survey for their own staff, which I found fascinating. It's referenced in a lot of studies, and so I felt like I would put that in there as well. It's very short, very simple, gives you like a general idea of where you are. And then this was the one that I thought was very, very cool. These folks put together a comprehensive maturity grid. So walking you through the concepts, it's kind of like our matrix for performance evaluations, like we call it now. But anyways, so you can be on a scale, right? It's not necessarily that you like have conquered or mastered some idea completely, or you don't know it at all. There's actually like stages along the way, and you can map yourself out on these stages and figure out where your next steps are. So I thought this is very cool. And so what I did is I took the 2 pages that contain the grid out of their study, and I made it this separate reference sheet here for you if you want to just download this. But it's also part of a larger paper called Doing Good with Data, Development of a Maturity Model for Data Literacy in Non-Governmental Organizations. And so I felt too that this one really was geared towards, if there can be specifically a user persona that's like us, right? This is pretty close. Also, there's a lot of stuff geared towards university librarians, which I found interesting, trying to convince them that they're the right folks to teach information literacy and data literacy as a subset. And then lastly, this is their Excel workbook that they put together to do your own assessment. So this is really pretty comprehensive. It's a really thorough assessment tool, which is why we didn't walk through it together here. But it's in there if you really want to take it to the next level. Okay. So as I mentioned, there are a ton of resources in here, and both internal to campus and external. And I put a couple of other survey assessments in here that require your email to get the results for, so just beware. But the great thing is there's a ton of organizations and things here on campus that can get you started. So in addition to my community of practice, Cal Data Visualization Network, there are lots of others out there. And then the mastermind groups is a thing that we put together, the Cal Data Visualization Network. And they are sort of separate informal learning opportunities that's focused on a particular specific tool. So we had surveyed the network and found that people were really interested in learning software specific things to help them get better at making visualizations. And the top 3 things people wanted to learn were SQL, Excel, and Tableau. And so we have mastermind groups for all 3 of them, and they meet either monthly or every other month, depending. And what's exciting is right now we're in the middle of doing like a group analysis of the study guide for Excel, the study guide for becoming an Excel expert. So you may or may not know that a lot of software out there nowadays has like certificates you can pay for and prove that you know the tool. And so Excel has levels. So the expert one is what the group felt was like that next level from where we presently are to what they where we want to get to. And so we collectively walk through and present to each other chapters in the study guide. And it's been really amazing and helpful and truly collaborative. It's great. I highly recommend it. Oh, and then the people in culture, which I guess is, I should change the name of that now. People in culture, basically there's a whole cluster of growth opportunities for campus through their thing. And so some of their things are through their website. Some of their example things are the Wisdom Cafe newsletter, which is super helpful. And they put together a thing that's called the Transferable Skills Library, which I thought was very interesting. So their perspective is all campus staff, right? Not necessarily like this specific set of tools, but they list all of the transferable skills you might need to get ahead in your career. And when you click on it, you see here's critical thinking. It takes you to a resource page, which is really amazing. So you get everything here: e-courses, articles, videos, more resources. So this is out there, and if you didn't know that, here you go. And okay, so this slide has links to our staff organization site and the sign-up sheet for our newsletter. We're primarily right now doing sporadic newsletter output, and the mastermind groups is where we're focusing our attention. And that is all I have. So thank you very much. And please ask me questions if you have them.
Wow, let's give Kari a big round of applause using our applause icons. From metaphors to Boolean data types, I'm definitely feeling more data literate. As a reminder, all the slides, the Zoom recording, the Zoom chat from today will be put into the CAN listserv. And we do have time for questions, so feel free to either pop them in the chat or unmute yourself and ask them verbally.
UC Learning Center has some great stuff. Yeah, someone put that in chat. Good point. Yes, that's actually not on here, and I should add that. I took out the extension courses because they're no longer free. But we have on campus a gentleman named Keith Stamsell, who actually does some really great targeted, specific learning workshops. So things like specifically pivot tables, which is really cool. You can kind of do like an a la carte self-teaching journey.
Hey, Kari.
Yes.
This is Kelly Ball. I have a question. I've noticed that you have a really great eye for design, and I'm wondering if that's just something that you picked up along the way, or if you took any other training or studied something to get where you are in that respect.
Well, thanks. That's very kind of you. No, I definitely did not start off with this skill set. It's definitely a learned thing. And I'll make a note to add it to the resource folder, specifically for designing things, because there's a whole other set of tools and concepts and ideas that relate to that are definitely masterable. What do you think, Katie?
Any other questions? All right, well, you know where to find Kari, you know where to find me. I will be sending out the links shortly. I hope this session has helped with your professional development. I also hope you feel more connected to this community. It's an awesome community. And finally, I wish you and your family are well and safe. I hope you all have a great weekend. Take care.